Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Hammer, an Umpire podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Weber. I appreciate you if you're a returning listener, and if this is your first time, well, I hope you like what you hear and you come back for another episode. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a variety of things. New NCAA mechanics for 3- and 4-man crews. We'll be talking about umpire masks, what you might look for when you are purchasing an umpire mask. I'll do an umpire spotlight on Barlick, the Hall of Fame umpire. Also, I'm going to talk about the benefits of yoga for umpiring and stretching and flexibility that I've noticed anyway. And finally, another topic would be addressing coaches. How do you address coaches, and how do you expect them to address you while you're conducting your games? So that's what I've got this week. Hopefully that sounds fairly interesting, and you'll stick with me and see what I've got to say. So make sure that if you're in your car, that your speakers are turned up loud enough to hear what I'm talking about. And if you've got your earbuds in or your AirPods on, make sure they're working properly for this week's episode of The Hammer, an Umpire podcast. Recently, the NCAA released their preseason guide and also their online clinic video, and they go over a variety of topics, and many of them pretty interesting, actually. But there are a few changes that will be coming out in the new book for 2020 mechanics, and they have some changes for 3- and 4-man. For 3-man, they want U1 and U3 to be well positioned to see line drives hit at the feet of the first and third baseman when those players are in their normal position. They think that you should be in a spot where you're within a distance. You can just take a step or two forward to make a call on those things. And I know that when I'm working those positions, and I've been taught to always be adjusting to where they are, so that you're within an angle and a distance that you can, see a line drive at their feet. You know what? I can't remember the last time I saw a line drive at one of their feet, but, it's going to happen sometime, and I'm going to be in the right spot, I hope. So the other thing is that they mentioned is proper positioning for U1 for pickoff plays at first base. So they want all umpires to start with their inside foot next to the foul line and not straddling the line. I guess this has been an issue with some people. That's the way I was taught, so that's the way I do it. But now they want that to be more of a uniform thing. And then the other thing for 3-umpire system is umpires aren't allowed to start in the infield and then run to a position out in the dirt looking straight down the baseline during a steal play at second base. So basically, all steal plays must be taken either between the B and C starting positions. You can't. I've seen some major league guys, on 4-man, obviously, be behind the base and come down and get that look coming straight in, almost like working the wedge or working the base, which is great. But when you're in 3-man, that makes you vulnerable to other rotations and things like that. So I guess that's the reasoning for that. As far as some changes for 4-man mechanics, again, they want the U1 and U3 to be in the position to see the line drives at the feet, just like in 3-man. But the other change that they have is for U2 and his line drive coverage, his or her, I guess. So what they want is when U2 is positioned in the outfield, they always want you now to work over the inside shoulder of that infielder that's closest to second base, so that you can rule on line drives in your coverage area. Another change, or at least emphasis for 4-man, is on fly ball coverage, and so they do not want umpires to automatically go out on fly balls, with or without runners on base. So umpires are expected to read fly balls and go out on trouble balls. You got to do your pause, read, and react. And, if in doubt, you go out. But they want you to do the practice the way that you're supposed to, and not just try to have it more of a mindless, like, oh, I go out on every fly ball when nobody's on base, or those kind of things. Another four-man emphasis is when there's a home run hit with nobody on base, that it's not necessary anymore to have the entire crew fully rotate. You three can go out, down the line, and then come back to third base for a touch. At that base, he has enough time to do that. If you two goes out, you three can easily take all the touches at second and third, right? And if you one goes out, either you two or the plate umpire should have the touch at first, because you one's not going to be able to get back in time to see that if he went out. An additional thing, proper positioning for U1 for pickoff plays at first base. Umpires should start with their inside foot next to the foul line, just like they're talking about in three-man. They want you to do that in four-man as well. And then umpires aren't allowed to start in the infield and then runs position out in the dirt, looking straight down the baseline. You got to steal plays from B and C, just like they're talking about in three-man. And then also, if U1 goes out and U2 slides toward first to take R1 back into first, U3 will then slide immediately into second base and be ahead of any potential play that may develop ahead of the runner at second base. So they want that change as well. And finally, U2 will no longer shift over toward third base with less than 2 outs. So like in this situation, U2 is required to be on the left side of second base. And using this new mechanic, U2 will retain his normal coverage of having all trouble balls in the outfield in the V from left to right field. And additionally, U2 will be in a better position to take a batter runner back to first should U1 go out. So U2 should always remain over the shortstop inside, left shoulder, closest to second base to help with all line drive coverage. So those are some of the highlights of the mechanics changes that will be coming up in the new CCA manual. Recently, Referee Magazine had an article about how you address coaches. Like, what do you say? Do you say their first name? Do you say coach? Do you say Skip? Do you say Coach so-and-so, whatever their last name might be? I'm interested to know what you guys think about that. How do you do things? Leave me a voicemail, let me know. Personally, I usually just say coach. If I happen to know their first name, which I do like to know their first name, I address them by their first name, and I like it when they address me by my first name. Now, in this particular article, they talked about how maybe that's not so good. I think that if you're only addressing one coach by the first name and the other one you're not, or you're not attempting to, then I can see that being a problem. They also mentioned, like sometimes you're having a pregame meeting or such, and they're giving a hug and they're like, hey, how's it going? And they're really getting into, like they just had a family reunion or something like that. I think that's not good. I don't like that. Even if you know the person pretty well, it should be professional when you get up there. Shake their hand, say, hey, how you doing? That's fine. But it shouldn't be like you guys, are going to go out and have a beer or something afterward. Even if you are, it shouldn't be like that. Okay. But I do find that it's harder for coaches to yell at a person's first name than ump or blue or those kind of things. And that's another issue we'll talk about, what they say to us. But and I think that people respond better, coaches in particular, when you do address them by their first name, because that's who they are. If it's Bill, you say, Bill, this is what I got here. What can I help you with? You have a question, Bill? Those kind of things. I think that goes a long way. I think it makes it more personal. And it's harder to be personal when you're addressing somebody by their first name. I don't think this should be the case necessarily with any of the players except for your catcher. I mean, I address my catchers by their first name as well. And I think that puts you on a little bit more working relationship kind of thing. All right. Is it okay to call them, Coach Smith or whatever they might be? Certainly that's fine. If you forget their first name, calling them coach is fine. But there's a certain distance to that as well. And I think that that's not always good. Now, what should coaches or players say when they're addressing us? Well, preferably, I'd like a coach to call me by my first name, to call me Kevin. I prefer that, number one. Players, I prefer them to call me sir, or if they happen to know my name is Kevin, they can call me Kevin. I mean, I prefer my catchers to call me by my first name, or sir, not Blue. And I've got an umpire assigner in my area who that's one of his biggest pet peeves, and he's passed it on to a few other people that don't call me Blue. He's even had T-shirts made up for his camps talking about not calling him Blue, especially when, like, if we're working collegiate ball, we're wearing black most of the time. So it's like very annoying when somebody calls you Blue and you're not even wearing blue. But nonetheless, it can be slightly disrespectful, I think, and it makes you more of an easier target. I think that's why it's a better thing if they're calling you either sir or they're calling you by your first name, and you're the one that has to start that. You don't want to be a jerk about it necessarily, unless they continue to do it just to try to get under your skin or something. But just say, hey, no, you can call me Kevin or you can call me sir. You don't have to call me Blue. That kind of thing, in a nice, cordial kind of way, at least initially. If it becomes more of a problem, I guess, you can be a little more forceful about it. But then again, you got to pick and choose your battles. I mean, is your battle going to be what they're calling you all the time, or are you just trying to do your job? So you got to kind of make some good decisions when it comes to those kind of things. Frequently, I will look up the names of head coaches if I haven't had them before, and see what their names are. I don't particularly care that much about the assistant coaches. If they tell me their name, I usually remember it. I might say that, but I'm not in the business of talking to assistant coaches. I might look up the names of the catchers if it's a collegiate game I'm doing, because you can have more easily accessible rosters. High school, that's a little bit tougher. And obviously other leagues, that's tougher. But kind of knowing them going in, or especially if you're working the plate, you say, hey, John, how's it going? Yep, good to see you, and it's like, all right, Bill, hey, how you doing? And they're like, wow, this guy knows both our names. Sometimes, I've never had a coach and I know their name as soon as I come out there, and they're like, whoa, good to see you again. I'm thinking, well, buddy, I've never seen you before in my life, but I'm glad you think that you've had me before. And if they think that they've had you before, and then they don't remember anything bad, they think, well, this guy must have been pretty good because I don't remember anything bad about him, so he must have been all right. That's what I figure. So I've had that happen on several occasions. So I think it's worthwhile to look up some coaches' names and at least know them in case you want to use that. So that's just a little piece of advice from my end, I guess. Anyway, let me know what you think about this topic. Send me a voicemail or send me an email, and let me know the kind of terminology that you use as far as addressing coaches, and the kind of terminology you expect from the players and coaches when you're working a game. And I'd be interested to see how that works out for you and what you think is best. I'd like to talk to you about probably your most important piece of equipment. That's your mask. So I guess the first thing you got to decide is, are you going to have a hockey style bucket type mask, or are you going to have more of the traditional face mask that catchers and umpires wear? Personally, I wear a more traditional mask. I think it looks more professional. Sorry if you don't agree, but I like it when I take my mask off. I've got my hat on, and I think that this looks better. And I still feel like with the mask that I own that I get the protection that I need. So, I guess the first thing you look at is as far as the weight. A lot of people look at the weight, how heavy is a mask. And the best thing you can do, of course, is try masks on. If you go to a store or if you're at a clinic or something and one of the providers of equipment are there, then you can, try on different masks and see what you think. Because, 1 pound to 1.6 pounds or something, that can make a big difference, and some people are a little bit more finicky about that. So that's important. What kind of harness does it have? A lot of the materials that they make these masks out of are lighter weight now anyway, so you usually don't get as heavy a mask as they used to many years ago. So, however, though, the most important thing is protection. What's the mask that's going to be most likely to protect you from getting a concussion? because that's the thing that will end you very quickly as far as your umpiring career, and also could cause you troubles throughout your whole life. So, you have to kind of do a little research on this. I mean, masks are expensive. We're talking, hundreds of dollars potentially, and you want something that you're going to make a good investment in. So look at what they say. What do they have? Some kind of testing? Do they have ratings? Have they tried these things out? I mean, you can believe them or not believe whatever their findings are, but it's good to see what they say. How fast of a pitch can it take, or a ball can it take off the mask and still give you a chance to not get a concussion. Nothing's going to be perfect, but do whatever you can do for that, and make your best gut decision. And the next thing is the comfort of the padding, right? Some masks, they feel a little bit different on your chin or your forehead or wherever they might be. Obviously, you want padding that is giving you good protection, but the level of the padding, what is it made out of? What kind of leather is it made out of? If it's made out of, doe skin or calf skin or whatever it might be, that makes a difference too for some guys. Another important thing is the vision it gives you. Some masks, the way that the frame sits is closer or farther away from your face. Maybe the angle of the bars and stuff. So you want as much vision as possible, and the lowest profile that you can get, that's comfortable for you with the most protection. So this can be slightly different for most guys. And then, of course, through all that, obviously, the best value. What's the kind of thing that is going to work for your budget and also give you the most protection? And is it the kind of mask that's going to be around that if you need a harness replacement or padding replacements, are you going to be able to find those fairly easily at a reasonable price? Or is it just gone and you can't find it? You're going to buy a brand new mask anyway. So that's the most important stuff there. I was told by a minor league umpire that you should probably replace your pads once a year, because you take different shocks and hits with those, and then they will probably give your best performance if you're able to do that. So the mask that I use, Force 3 mask, they're about $20 to replace those, so that's pretty reasonable. And finally, what kind of accessories can work with your mask? Is there a throat guard that works well with it? Is there a sun shield? How does it fit on particular hats that you might use? Those are things to keep in mind when you're purchasing a mask and seeing what kind of long-term investment it is. Like I say, I use the Force 3 mask. I've got the second version of that out, and I really like it, and I think it saved me from a couple concussions. I'd like to know what you guys use out there. Send me an email or leave me a voicemail and let me know what mask you use and why you think it works really well for you. I've mentioned before that I try to do stretching at least a couple times a week, particularly during the off season. And I do that by going to my local YMCA and doing yoga classes. And I know some of you, you're thinking, yoga? I'm not doing yoga. But I think it's really helped me out quite a bit. And I'd like to just mention a few of the stretches that I do. They have different names for yoga poses, they call them, that might be beneficial to you as well. And I've had issues with my knees. I had surgery on those. I've had back surgery many years ago, and I definitely think that yoga is one of the things that has kept me pretty healthy and fairly flexible. So some of the poses that I like to focus on deal with things that I notice I have issues with when I'm umpiring. My hamstrings, particularly. All right, my low back, making sure that that's loose. My calves, my knees. So those are the kind of things that I want to do, and I want to make sure that all of my body parts, I guess, are moving in the correct way. Like my back's moving in the right way. I'm not having too much tension anywhere, like in my shoulders. And that my ankles are working well, my knees are working well. Those are very important things, and I try to do these stretches a little bit here and there, like before I umpire or just after I umpire, to make sure that I'm continuing to stay limber so that I don't incur some injury. First pose I'd like to mention is called downward facing dog. And you can look all these up on the internet if you'd like to try to do them. But I think it particularly helps with your shoulders and your back, and helps me with my calves to make sure that those are stretched out, and along with my ankles, helps get those stretched out, and it helps your hamstrings as well. So that's the first pose I like to mention. Next pose I like is they call it triangle. That particularly helps with my low back to kind of readjust it, and also stretch out your hamstrings. So that's a good one to do at times. They have different warrior poses. There's warrior 1, which is good for stretching your back as well, and making sure that your left and right lateral type movements are working well. And then there's warrior 2, which also is a good kind of stretch and readjustment for your lower back. All right. I also like triangle pose. That's like the best one, I think, for making sure that your hamstrings are stretched out well. Your hamstrings are, connected, as I've discovered over the years, with your lower back. So if your hamstrings are stretched out well, you're less likely to have some issues with your lower back if that's a problem for you. Another pose that's beneficial is pigeon pose, and there's a few ways to do this. It's kind of like doing a figure 4, but that's particularly helpful for stretching out your hips. I find that if your hips are stretched out, particularly when you're working the plate, that really seems to help quite a bit. So I do that whenever I can as well. And then also, I find that chair pose, which is kind of like doing a pose while you're standing, that you're sitting in a chair, really helps with strengthening your hips and your thighs and your lower leg, basically all your legs, I guess, for working your squats and stuff when you're working the plate. I like doing that throughout the off season. I think that helps strengthen things. And then finally, child's pose, which you can look that up too. That's a very beneficial pose. It's kind of a resting pose, but that's a good pose to use, especially after you work a game, because it kind of loosens up your lower back and kind of stretches out your whole back, but particularly your lower back, and also your knees and legs and stuff. So anyway, those are a few poses that I think are beneficial. Those are ones I try to do before or after I'm working games, and I try to go to the yoga practice at the YMCA because it makes me do it. If I just say, oh, well, I'll just do it 2 or 3 times a week on my own, I don't know. I'm not as consistent that way. But if I know I'm going on Wednesday and I'm going on Sunday morning, that's usually what I do. And then I try to fit in other times if I can. Then I'm consistent that way, and that's an hour of doing it, because it's hard for me to do it for a whole hour on my own. I might do it for like 10, 15 minutes. But an hour of, and they do other types of poses and things too that are useful. But I try to combine that with some cardiovascular, mainly walking, and making sure that I'm stretched out the best I can so I can work as long as possible. So if you have any questions or comments about those things, feel free to send me an email or leave me a voicemail through the Anchor.fm application. This episode's Umpire Spotlight is focusing on Al Barlick, the Hall of Fame umpire from Springfield, Illinois. Known as one of the loudest umpires in the game, Barlick was respected by his peers and players alike for his hustle, stern demeanor, and a strict but fair interpretation of the rules. He called his first All-Star game in just his second Major League season, before serving in World War II with the United States Coast Guard from 1943 to 1945. During 27 seasons as a National League umpire, Barlick would call 7 All-Star games and 7 World Series, so very impressive. His rise to becoming one of baseball's most revered umpires kind of started at the bottom of a coal mine in Springfield, Illinois. In 1935, Barlick helped his father in Springfield's Peabody Mine when a friend asked if he could fill in as an umpire for the local municipal league games. Typical story, just some guy filling in and finding that they have a niche for umpiring and then going from there, right? 5 years later, Barlick debuted behind the plate in a doubleheader at Shibe Park, becoming one of the youngest umpires in Major League history at age 25. He was filling in for Bill Clem, who was out with an injury. Bill Clem was always a big proponent of Barlick, and he said that the boy is a natural, He said, if Barlick's grandmother and his worst enemy were out there on opposite sides of a ball game, he'd call everything the way he sees it, favoring neither side. He's going to be the best umpire in history. I don't know if he's the best umpire in history, but he did make it to the Hall of Fame, so he's definitely one of them. Anyway, after he returned from the Second World War, he was a crew member for the 1946 World Series at just age 31. Throughout his career, he was part of many historic moments. He was the first base umpire and stood directly behind Jackie Robinson when he debuted for the Brooklyn Dodgers on April 15, 1947, and broke the color barrier. He worked 6 no-hitters, along with the first games at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles and the Astrodome in Houston, and then the new Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. He was also a crew member for the first National League Championship Series in 1969, in which the Miracle Mets from New York beat the Atlanta Braves. He was paid a compliment by many people, saying that the greatest testimony to Barlick was what is said about any good umpire and what's said about a good umpire now, that you never knew that he was there. He just went about his business, did an excellent job. The game unfolded the way it was supposed to, and he really had no say on who was the winner or the loser. In 1961, there was a poll conducted by the Sporting News to determine the best umpires in each league, the National League and American League, and they determined that Barlick was the most respected umpire in the National League among managers and coaches. Because, Barlick wasn't a real big fan of the honor and the polling. He said that the very idea of rating is unfair in that it places labels on hardworking officials who always try to do a good job. And as we know as umpires, some of the guys that maybe get a bad rap by coaches or players or whoever really are a good umpire. They just kind of do what they need to do, and they're not out there looking for a popularity contest. One of Barlick's favorite players that he worked for was Stan Musial. Not surprising, Stan Musial was a class guy. And in September 1963, Barlick requested that he get to work Stan Musial's final game. But true to his unbiased character, Barlick, he wasn't giving Musial any favors or anything during the game, and called him out on strikes in his first at bat. So, that's typical of Al Barlick. I mean, he said, I think I earned the players' respect, and that's the ultimate in life, isn't it? I didn't care if they liked or disliked me as long as I had their respect. I think that's something all of us can take away from Al Barlick. In 1963, Barlick was very important and instrumental in helping to organize the first umpires union, which, as we've seen through the test of time, has been very favorable to current professional umpires. So throughout his career, he was a vocal advocate for better pay and respect for game callers. He says we have to shoulder the too much blame. He said, all we do is enforce the rules. We don't write the rules. We just make certain none are violated. I'd say that's what everyone's trying to do in our current times as well. Barlick's final Major League season was 1971, and during that year, the Umpire of the Year award was given to him by his colleagues. Now, unlike the award that he was given back in the early 60s, he really cherished this because it was given to him by fellow umpires, which, as we all know, means a lot more. If a fellow umpire tells you that you did a good job or likes the way you did something or respects you in a certain way, that carries a lot more weight than if a player or coach or somebody says something to you. For his accomplishments, Al Barlick was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1989 and was alive at that time and able to partake in the ceremony and give a speech. And he said that was it was just a miracle to him that he made it that far. And I'm sure that everyone, if you were able to make it to the Hall of Fame, you probably would think that was the case as well. Barlick's Hall of Fame plaque reads, Albert Joseph Barlick, umpire, National League, 1940 to 1971. Earned respect of peers and players alike with booming basso calls, clear and decisive hand signals, knowledge of rules, proficiency on balls and strikes, ability to anticipate and then handle rough situations, and unceasing hustle. Professional umpire for 5 decades, and at age 25, one of the youngest to reach majors, where he worked 27 full seasons. So that is this episode's Umpire Spotlight, Hall of Fame umpire Al Barlick. Well, once again, we've come to the end of another episode of the Hammer and Umpire podcast. As I always say, I appreciate you sticking with me to the end, because I know not everybody always does that. Sometimes they just listen to half and then they shut it down, which is fine if that's all the time that you have. Well, this is our 9th episode, which is actually pretty significant because based on the research I've done, a lot of podcasts end after about 7 episodes. They don't get to the 8th because the podcast maker or host or whoever gets burned out and doesn't make any more podcasts, and then it just sits there. So I'm in the long haul for this. I've got a bunch of ideas still rattling around in my head on what I can do. I think a lot of them are topical as far as what time of year it is. Like right now I'm doing more, off-season kind of stuff. But obviously once we get to more preseason stuff, I can talk about those things. In the middle of the season, there's always certain issues to talk about. And of course, postseason, there's different things to talk about as well. So I would appreciate any kind of feedback that you guys give for me as far as what kind of topics you want me to cover. I think I've done a pretty good job with that, listening to some feedback that I've gotten so far. I appreciate all my listeners, that I've gained. I get a good number of listens every week, and throughout the United States primarily, but also in Canada, New Zealand, and Indonesia. So that's pretty cool that we got different people in different parts of the world listening. We're wanting to learn about baseball umpiring. So, it's all pretty good. I feel pretty happy with how things have moved so far, and I'm going to try to keep moving it forward. So I appreciate you listening, and until next time, keep calling strikes.